Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving deep into the uh, dramatic restructuring of Jamaica's real estate landscape as 2025 comes to a close. And this isn't a story about quarterly earnings or, title deeds. It's a profound narrative about resilience, about memory, and the uncomfortable, necessary rediscovery of community.
All forced by a single indiscriminate natural disaster.
Exactly. And before Hurricane Melissa even arrived, the Jamaican property market was already navigating some pretty tricky currents. We saw this familiar tension. Buyers were eager, you had strong diaspora interest, local desire for security,
But the financials were tight.
very tight. Mortgage rates were unpredictable, and the cost of construction materials was just spiking far faster than wages.
The sources describe it perfectly. The market was walking a tightrope. You had this powerful underlying aspiration, the belief in buying back home or securing your future, and it was competing directly with the brutal reality of higher interest rates. And, for many, climate risk was still abstract.
Something you worried about later.
Right, after you signed the papers.
And the research highlights that this tightrope, it was deeply uneven. Who was actually benefiting from the better lending terms?
Precisely. The good rates, so to speak, were highly selective. They favored those who were already deeply entrenched within the formal banking system. So we're talking major corporations, established developers, or maybe those in the diaspora with significant equity.
Not the everyday local buyer.
No. For them, maybe relying on a small credit union or informal financial networks, the costs were just. They were becoming prohibitive. It really exacerbated a pre-existing inequality.
And that matters so much because property in Jamaica, as Dean Jones noted in the research, has always been more than just an asset class. It's an emotional artifact.
It is. Land is fundamentally tied to cultural identity and, history. Jones's observation that land is memory, inheritance, and proof that someone before you believed in tomorrow, that's key. When you treat property as heritage, not just profit.
Climate risk suddenly takes on a moral dimension.
Exactly. You aren't just protecting a loan, you're protecting a legacy. But this philosophical view was completely at odds with the fast-paced, financialized reality of modern construction.
And that conflict became brutally physical when the catastrophe hit. Melissa didn't care about market trends or cultural inheritance. She arrived and just erased boundaries. The source material really emphasizes this indifference. She crossed communities and parishes without respecting planning approvals or zoning or income brackets.
A completely indiscriminate catalyst. And it exposed the underlying vulnerability of the entire nation's housing stock, from mansions to the smallest informal settlement.
And the aftermath is what truly defines this deep dive. Even months later, the recovery is this patchwork of immense effort and just devastating loss. You see the sheer scale of the practical problem. I mean, imagine going into 2026 without reliable electricity.
Or water. Thousands of families are still living under temporary shelters, a piece of tarp here, a patched roof there. It's a daily struggle.
The images from the field research are so stark, especially from places like Black River. The source highlights that homes there weren't just damaged by wind or water. They were, and this is the researcher's word, erased.
Gone. They cease to exist, washed away completely. That level of destruction, it just overwhelms any formal structure, any insurance or governmental system instantly.
It does. The immediate need was practical, not theoretical. You can't wait for an insurance adjuster when your family is sleeping under the open sky.
And that's where we saw the true limitation of relying on formal systems alone. Insurance, which is supposed to be the ultimate backstop. It helped some, sure, but it disappointed many more with fine print or delays, and it utterly failed those whose homes just vanished.
So this forced an immediate return to the most basic form of construction, building with whatever is available, not always with what is ideal, relying heavily on sheer neighborly effort, board by salvaged board.
And if those formal systems crumbled or moved too slowly, what did start working? That failure is what leads us to the core aha moment of this entire analysis, and honestly the most uncomfortable revelation.
The research recounts this simple, very tense anecdote. It's from a line outside a community shop, a place where people were buying essentials like water and battery packs, their lives still fully disrupted. And one person, still visibly counting their losses, made a statement that stopped everyone cold. They said, Melissa was a good thing.
Wow. That's an explosive thing to say in a moment of communal suffering. How could destruction be a good thing?
Exactly. The immediate reaction was anger, shock. How dare you say that? But the researcher probed, and the explanation that followed was the key insight. Here's what gets really interesting. The speaker didn't mean the destruction itself was good. They meant the disruption was good. because it exposed something that had been systematically neglected in society.
The storm acted as a mirror.
A mirror, revealing not just cracks in the infrastructure, but cracks in the social contract.
It exposed how intensely and quietly Jamaicans had become isolated from one another. We talk about privacy, but for many, that had stretched too far. It had hardened into isolation.
People realized they didn't know the names of the family 3 doors down.
Not until they desperately needed their help to clear a road or share a bucket of water.
That's such a powerful distinction.
Backward.
Privacy metastasizing into isolation. It's like finding out the beautiful high fence you built for security also became the wall that kept necessary aid out.
It's the cost of modern individualism applied to an island community. But what followed was the essential counter-narrative, the visible signs of rediscovery. You saw neighbors, who may have been, cordial strangers for years, suddenly working side by side.
Not waiting for the government.
No, they were forming their own informal rebuilding groups, sharing generators, sharing tools, sharing information.
And crucially, the sources note this wasn't charity.
No, absolutely not. Charity implies an unequal transaction. This was partnership. It was defined by association and mutual survival. As Dean Jones put it so well, disaster doesn't create community. It reveals whether it was ever there to begin with.
And Melissa showed that beneath that veneer of isolation, the community still existed. It was dormant. And it only needed a catastrophic shock to wake up.
They realized instantaneously that a house is useless if the road to it is blocked and the neighbors won't help you clear it.
So this rediscovered necessity that social cohesion is a fundamental part of resilience is now driving much deeper, potentially permanent changes. The vulnerability of the housing stock is no longer abstract. It's a political imperative.
And we're seeing a significant shift from suggestions to mandates.
Take the conversation around hurricane straps.
Yep.
For anyone listening who may not be familiar with building codes, can you quickly explain what a hurricane strap is and why its absence proves so fatal?
Absolutely. Think of a hurricane strap as a heavy metal connection. It's often shaped like a clip or a band, and it literally ties the roof framing directly to the wall structure and often connects the wall to the foundation.
So it stops the roof from being peeled off.
Exactly. When strong winds hit, the biggest risk is uplift. The roof being peeled off the walls like a lid off a can. If the roof goes, the rest of the structure is immediately compromised. And the research showed that in so many older and informally built structures, these straps were just absent.
So if the absence of a small, inexpensive metal strap was the difference between survival and erasure,
Then mandating them becomes a daily planning reality, not an optional upgrade. And that shift is happening at every level, from mandating straps or specific concrete mixtures to revising zoning laws to prohibit building in the most vulnerable areas.
and buyers are now asking fundamentally different questions.
They are, and insurers are actively rewriting their terms. They're often refusing coverage or pricing policies out of reach for unretrofitted or poorly sited properties.
Which brings us to the central tension that the research identified. And this is where it gets highly political and economic. If you mandate higher building standards, stronger materials, the cost goes up. So we are left with this stark conflict between affordability and resilience.
It's the developer's nightmare, and it's the policymaker's impossible puzzle. The question for developers moved from, can we build here, to,
So do we build here?
right, given the likely future climate events, should we? And the conflict is unavoidable. In a market desperate for housing, there is immense pressure to build cheaply and quickly. But the cost of building survivably, it's high. So who absorbs that cost?
Let me play devil's advocate for a moment. Isn't it a bit unrealistic to ask developers to shoulder that burden? I mean, if housing prices were already soaring before Melissa, mandating expensive resilience measures now will only push ownership further out of reach.
That's the critical challenge. And the source suggests it requires a fundamental redefinition of the word cheap. We have to realize that the cost of not building resiliently is exponentially higher in the long run.
You're not saving money by skipping the straps.
You're not. You're just transferring the catastrophic risk onto the homeowner, the community, and ultimately the state when the next storm hits. That's why the Dean Jones quote resonates so deeply. The cheapest house today can become the most expensive mistake tomorrow if climate is ignored. The resolution, as suggested by these rebuilding groups, lies in acknowledging that resilience isn't just structural, it's social.
So what does this all mean? As Jamaica stands at this quiet crossroads of December 2025, just days before Christmas, we've covered the catastrophe, the uncomfortable revelation, the new economic tension.
We're seeing a market that remains active, driven by that core aspiration we talked about.
But it's overwhelmingly cautious now.
The rebuilding is continuing, but the progress is deeply uneven. It reflects all those pre-existing inequalities that the storm laid bare.
And the climate threat is no longer something to be debated. It's an undeniable fact. It has to be factored into every single decision, from a mortgage application to a zoning approval.
And we have to reiterate, this is still a period of intense hardship. The festive season is arriving while people still lack basic necessities: power, water, a reliable roof. That reality prevents the nation from slipping back into a comfortable denial.
But the research shows that alongside this physical rebuilding, a deeper, necessary conversation has emerged. A conversation about values, family, association, responsibility to place.
And this isn't framed as some sweet romantic nostalgia for an imagined past. This is hard-earned necessity. The necessity of knowing your neighbor, of checking in, of collectively maintaining local infrastructure because the formal systems move so slowly.
So the ultimate lesson seems to be that relying on a disaster to unify a community is a profound failure of foresight.
Absolutely. The future must be intentionally human-centered, climate-aware, and brutally honest about risk, as Jones concluded. Progress without people is just construction. Development only matters when it strengthens human connection. The land remembered the importance of community, and when reminded by Melissa, the people are finally relearning it.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us into the necessary resilience emerging in Jamaica. This is an incredible example of how a physical catastrophe can force a massive structural and social reckoning.
If the resilience of property is now inseparable from the strength of the community, think about this. What specific non-monetary action can be taken right now, before the next event, to increase the actual value and security of your own neighborhood? It's not about the hurricane straps on your roof, it's about the connection to the roof next door. Mull over that as you process this information.